Picture this. Somewhere out there right now, a dedicated gardener is kneeling at the edge of a raised bed. They're lifting up a flat sheet of cardboard they laid down a few weeks ago to act as a weed barrier. And as they lift it, they see the soil underneath is just alive. There are glistening earthworms everywhere, crowded right up at the surface. Naturally, they smile, right? They see this as proof that the soil is thriving and that the cardboard trick worked perfectly. But while in this explainer, we're going to pause and look a little closer at what's really happening under there. So it's a question worth sitting with before you ever lay down another flat sheet on your soil. Are those worms throwing a party, or are they doing exactly what you would do if someone sealed every window and door in your house on a hot, still night? Yeah, they might actually be coming up for air. It turns out that innocent-looking flat sheet might be quietly suffocating the exact ecosystem you're trying to protect. And the data behind this suffocation is honestly fascinating. Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott, an extension horticulturist at Washington State University, who, by the way, has studied mulches for over 2 decades, ran a really careful greenhouse experiment on this. They compared bare soil to wood chips, landscape fabric, plastic, and cardboard. And the result? A single flat sheet of cardboard cuts the soil's exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide by roughly 10 times compared to a breathable layer of wood chips. 10 times. Just think about that for a second. Soil isn't a dead thing. It breathes. Roots breathe, microbes breathe, and earthworms, they literally breathe straight through their skin. Now, don't get me wrong here. Cardboard itself is definitely not the enemy. It is primarily made of cellulose, and the carbon in cardboard is genuinely excellent food for soil life. It's basically their daily bread. The problem isn't the material at all, it's the shape. You see, when cellulose is pressed flat, bone dry, and sealed across your garden bed, microbes can barely get a grip on it. That flat shape acts like a slow, suffocating lid, slowly starving that underground city of worms and roots of the oxygen they absolutely depend on. So, how do we fix this? That brings us to section 1, the 30-minute turn, changing a barrier into a sponge. The solution is honestly an embarrassingly simple process. First, you just need plain brown cardboard. No glossy coatings, no waxy waterproofing, no tape, and definitely no heavy colored ink. Just tear it up into pieces a couple of inches across. Then, you soak it and simmer it gently right on the stove. What you are watching happen is purely physical. The heat and water force their way between those tight, rigid fibers, loosening them up. The cardboard swells and slumps, breaking down into this damp pulp with a texture somewhere between, say, wet felt and cooled oatmeal. You haven't added anything. You've just opened up an airy, water-holding honeycomb. Now, you might be wondering, why go through the trouble of boiling it instead of just tossing it in a bucket of cold water for a few days? Well, there are 2 very good reasons. First up is speed. A hard board that might take days to break down in cold water surrenders in just 30 to 60 minutes on the stove. Second, and this is a massive benefit that almost nobody thinks of, heat sterilizes. A gentle boil kills off any hidden weed seeds and stray spores lurking in that secondhand delivery box. If you skip this step, a single hitchhiking weed seed could germinate and completely choke out the fragile seedlings you're trying to grow later on. It turns out getting the texture right after it cools down is the absolute most important skill here. It's all about the squeeze test. When you grab a handful of the cooled pulp and squeeze it, it needs to feel exactly like a well-wrung sponge. It should hold its shape when you press it, fall apart easily when you poke it, and release only a tiny drop or 2 of water. If your pulp is dripping wet, it's just going to pack back down and seal the air out all over again. You'd be right back where you started with that flat piece of cardboard. Okay, moving on to section 2, the magic toolkit. 6 uses for breathable cardboard pulp. Because the pulp provides amazing structure but lacks actual nutrients, our first tool pairs it with food to create a slow, steady feast for your earthworms. If you've ever fed worms fresh, wet kitchen scraps, you know it can go horribly wrong. Fresh scraps break down fast and hot, and if the moisture gets too high, it turns into this sour, airless sludge that reeks of vinegar and can literally drown your worms. But take a look at this recipe. By combining 1 part drained tea leaves for nitrogen, 1 part of our airy cardboard pulp for structure, and 1 part worm castings for microbes, you create an environment that perfectly mimics a cool, damp forest floor. The cellulose keeps those tiny air channels open. Just make sure the moisture is at that 60 to 70% level and tuck it shallowly into your beds. Just remember, never dump it in fat clumps thicker than your hand, or the center will run out of air. And this builds beautifully into tool number 2, living seed starting pods. You know, store-bought peat pellets are great for holding water, but they're essentially dead, and they really fight you when they dry out. Instead, we can blend 2 parts of our soft pulp, 1 part worm castings, 1 part fine compost, and a little bit of coco coir or fine biochar for extra air. Gently press these into little balls at that perfect damp sponge moisture level. What you've just made is a biologically active starter culture. When it's time to plant, the entire pod goes straight into the ground. Because it's so soft and alive, the roots grow right through it without ever experiencing that dreaded transplant shock. Tool number 3 is for that dry, stubborn compost pile that just sits there mocking you all year. Look, you don't need to boil cardboard for an entire pile. That would be ridiculous. Instead, you create a compost starter. Think of it kind of like a sourdough starter. You take a small batch of our boiled pulp, mix it with crumbled dry leaves, some brown paper, and a little finished compost, and you thread it right into the center of your dry heap. You're basically planting moist, living ignition points right in the heart of the pile. From those small, active spots, the moisture and decomposition will rapidly spread outward, waking the whole thing up. As things heat up outside, tools 4 and 5 are your summer survival strategies, especially if you're a container gardener. First up is smart mulch. Dry mulch can turn into brittle fluff in the heat. But if you mix 1 part of our pulp, thinned down to a loose porridge, with 3 to 4 parts dry mulch, the cellulose acts as a hidden water reserve, releasing moisture slowly. Just keep it 1 to 2 inches thick and away from the plant stem. Second, moisture capsules. By mixing pulp, castings, compost, and tea waste, you can bury these living, earth-building capsules near your roots. Instead of buying synthetic petroleum hydrogel crystals that honestly do nothing for soil health, these capsules drink in your watering, release it slowly, feed the microbes, and eventually turn into beautiful living earth themselves. Now, this next one is just delightful. Tool number 6 is seed paper. You take your wet pulp, blend it loose, stir in a pinch of worm castings, and scatter in some fast-sprouting seeds. Think lettuce, basil, or marigold. Then you just spread it as thin as a pancake on a screen and let it dry. You can literally do this sitting right at your kitchen table. When you're ready to plant, simply lay a piece of the dried paper on your soil, water it, and watch as the entire sheet dissolves while the seeds push right on through. It's clean, it's sterilized from the boiling, and honestly, it makes a brilliant zero-waste gift. And once you've really grasped the concept, the specialized combinations are virtually endless. For instance, you can make a soil-building cake by pressing pulp with used coffee grounds, which are wonderfully neutral and provide nitrogen, along with finely crushed eggshells. If you've got a fire pit, you can make potash pellets with pulp, biochar, and a very careful pinch of wood ash for an alkaline potassium boost. Or you can even replicate a method made famous by mycologist Paul Stamets. Layer your sterilized, boiled pulp with oyster mushroom spawn. Bury that colonized cake in your garden, and you've literally planted an underground fungal network that'll ferry water and nutrients right between your plants. Finally, we arrive at Section 3, the golden rule: avoid the airless lump. If you pack this pulp too densely, you're going to recreate that suffocating flat cardboard we talked about earlier. So how do you know if you've messed up and accidentally made an airless lump? Well, your nose is the ultimate instrument here. A healthy cardboard pulp mix should smell mild and clean, kind of like wet paper, damp earth, or young compost. If you ever notice a danger smell, something sharply sour, rotten, or like stagnant water, that is the unmistakable smell of oxygen running out. If that happens, whatever you do, do not bury it. Immediately loosen up the mix by stirring in some dry leaves, coco coir, or dry soil to open up those air channels and let it breathe again. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought. The reality is, garden stores are never going to sell you a boiled cardboard box. It just can't be neatly packaged, branded, and shipped on a shelf. But transforming the throwaway items in your recycling bin into a dynamic, living soil network, that is an incredibly powerful act. It shows that the garden always rewards those who look twice at what the world calls waste. So the next time you're about to lay a flat, suffocating sheet of cardboard down, or even just toss it in the bin, ask yourself, could this become a sponge, a nursery, or a living fungal web instead? Keep questioning, keep growing, and keep finding grace in the roots of the earth. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.